Hello and welcome back to Ground Level Theology. As always, with me is my co host, Dave Hoffman. Welcome back, Dave.
What's up, guys? Hey, I'm so happy to be back. Let's rock and roll.
Oh man, do we have a good one today? And oh man, we really got to jump right into this one because we know this topic is going to take some time for sure. I'll go ahead and introduce that
100%.
topic right now, and then we'll maybe just tell our viewers how this is kind of going to play out for those maybe on YouTube, and we'll see what we can do on Spotify. But the subject of today, a controversial subject, though it should not be, as people that have gone through public school or any sort of history class. And that is the question: what does separation of church and state mean? What does it mean when we talk about separation of church and state? It seems like it's been a phrase that means that you cannot be religious and in government, that we are to keep
hmm
the religious institutions, that we're to keep religious faith outside of our governing bodies. But the question is that what it means? And even more so, what does it mean? And we're gonna have to look at history for this. That being said, for our viewers, because this is such a large topic, we just want to. Oh, just came back in there, Dave. We just want
Oh,
to
hello.
segment this podcast today into maybe about 2 or 3 parts. And so we'll have kind of big epochs, maybe we'll say, big chunks of time, sort of in subject, and then we'll leave off there, start again, and then that way you can kind of track with us in more bite-sized, rather than like the 3.5 hour episode that we had with our relationship to Israel, or the 2.5 for that episode a couple of weeks, just to kind of give it to you in a little bit more uh, bite-sized forms. So for this part, and Dave and I are going to keep track of time, what we should be doing here in order to kind of establish, I mean, we really have to ground all of this in what we mean, right? We have to in order to understand what we mean, what it means now, we have to ask the question of how we got here. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah. Like we take it for granted. Like we were born when we were born. Like you know, early '90s, mid '90s for me because I'm a young buck. Um, we just grew up and we just take this idea for granted, not realizing, hey, this idea of separation of church and state uh, is actually we think 200 years it's a long time, and it is, but actually, like when we think about how old the earth like really is and just how long people have existed,
Yeah.
the idea of separation of church and state actually is relatively new, at least in the sense of how it's articulated in the United States of America, having our Constitution compared to other countries and whatnot. And
Hmm.
we just take like, hey, separation of church and state, and we just kind of know about it, and it is not in the average everyday vernacular. But like, we didn't just come up with separation of church and state. There had to be a reason for why the founding fathers came up with it. Why it might have even been a precedent way before them as well. And so
Yeah.
we got to go way back.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna preface this right now off the bat, guys. My allergies have been kicking up a lot today and lately, so if you see me drinking a lot of water and just trying to get through probably how I sound, that's what it is. Just bear with me, guys. I am I am predisposed to seasons apparently.
Excuses, excuses. Yeah.
Well, anyways, in a normal fashion, if we were talking about what is such a theological topic or something, we would start out with a definition. But because we are talking about what an idea means, we really
Mm.
have to look at the history and the precedent that we derive that from. And so we're going to have to do a little bit of a history lesson here. And I think it would be really good to kind of move our way up to speed. Now, I'm not going to start at in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Uh,
I mean,
we're
that's
going to
not a
jump
bad place, but
yeah,
yeah.
we're gonna jump past that past when, maybe Revelation was written,
Mm.
not when it happens. That's that's arguable.
Different
Yeah,
conversation.
different conversation altogether. But just to say what we know, at least from the Bible, is that Israel was a theocracy. That is, that God was its king, and the religious or the religion is in fact the law. That's why you have the law of Moses. It's civil
Hmm.
in that aspect. So we have a theocracy in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, obviously they are occupied by Rome, but yet they still live in such a manner in which God is the king. And so that's kind of where we're coming from in the Bible. Now, moving past that, even as we're going through Acts, Christianity is flourishing as it booms out from Acts 2. Christianity is flourishing under its authorities, right? Because there's persecution going on, there's Gnosticism, there's all these heresies, and Christians are responding with their apologetics. They are having to defend themselves from the accusations that they are cannibals and incestuous from the Greeks,
Oh yeah.
because we eat the body and blood of our Savior, and we call each other brothers and sisters. We have to do this apologetics to essentially say, hey, no, that's not what we mean by that. We are very peaceful people. We come out of Judaism because we believe that we have our Jewish Messiah, and that's come to fruition in Jesus. And so Christianity is having to grow in and kind of explode under the Roman Empire. Now, coming out of that, Christianity that's being kind of persecuted, it's being targeted. We know this with Saul himself, but even in some other fashions as well, like Emperor Nero, and every not Emperor Nero,
Dionysius. Well, you have
Dionysius. That's
Nero.
what it was.
Well, you have both Nero
Nero
and
is, yeah.
Dionysius.
So there's some persecution there, but it's finally accepted as we have Emperor Constantine. Now, Constantine doesn't necessarily make it nationalistic as mandatory, but he does kind of have some of that hinting. In fact, people will debate whether he was a Christian himself until the end of his death. I mean, the end of his reign, when he's getting ready to die and he decides to baptize himself. But yeah, so it's commonly accepted by that point, and then probably maybe by the end of his life to following that, we have Christianity as the national religion of the kingdom. So it's now accepted as the rule over the kingdom. So we're
Mm.
here at about 300 AD now. Now we're moving past that, and for the next for the next maybe 1,000 or so years, we're going to have this sort of tug of war. And I know, Dave, that you know what I'm talking about. This is Christianity and Western culture, 1 and 2
Oh
right here.
yes. Let's
It's,
go. Thanks, Dr.
yeah.
Lifkin.
It's just one about two.
Sean.
It's about 1,200 years, 1,200, maybe
Uh,
1,300 years
oh
of
gosh.
history. And the history is essentially a tug of war of this concept itself. Christianity is the rule of law over the kingdom. That is to say, that the popes at that time, because we have religious leaders that are the pinnacle that we can turn to. And so at that time, there are popes. There are popes that are over the king, right? And there are popes
Hmm.
that serve under the king. And so some popes, they're like under the king. They write their theology. They say that the church serves the king because the king is the vice regent of God, right? If
Right.
Romans 13 is true, that he is placed there by God, then the church needs to serve up under him, and the church is true regardless of who reigns, anyways. I mean, let's just look at Acts. I just talked about that. But then you have the flip side. The king is rightfully under the church, as God is the one who has instituted him, and Pope as the one who has the keys to bind and loose. Pope, who is the vice regent of God himself, has the power to take down the king. So it is the king that has to bow to the church. And in one example we have of this is King Henry, Henry the Fourth actually, had to beg Pope Pope Gregory the Seventh for forgiveness. Now, why did he have to beg for forgiveness? Well, that's because Pope Gregory the Seventh excommunicated the king.
Nice. Oh, we would love to
He
be able to do that, wouldn't we?
Yeah, he took
Execute
down the
people
king and
or excommunicate.
excommunicated him. The king had no power.
Mm.
He went from king and ruler over the entire kingdom to being essentially a beggar that can't get change from people because you shun the excommunicated. So even the peasants wouldn't have him.
Oh,
And so the king essentially got dethroned, excommunicated by Pope Gregory, and King Henry came in 1077 on his hands and knees essentially to the gate to beg Pope Gregory for forgiveness so that he could be reinstated. That's just one example of the Pope having authority over the king. But now as we get towards this different segment here, and we're going to start to transition here more into the time of our founding fathers, but we're going to start to lay down the foundation here of that which the founding fathers will build from. So this is sort of a transition here, but King Henry VIII, not to be confused with the one that we just talked about, that's King Henry IV. So we're about 4 kings away now. King Henry VIII in 1534. So we've now jumped about 500 years.
nice.
Now, some of you might be saying, well, the Pope is over the king. He's essentially king of the king. Well, that's not the way the church has always been. The church has not been a ruling authority over the government. That's why I'm stressing this point here. In history, it was always a tug of war. Sometimes the king was on top, sometimes the pope was on top. It was always a question of who should be, and it was a theological question, really. And so as we get to 1534, we're getting closer to the time period that we're going to be looking at here. Here is the situation that we run into. King Henry VIII, because he wants to divorce his wife and marry, he wants to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and wants to remarry so that he can have sons to continue his dynasty. This is 1534 again. He creates the Church of England because the Pope does not believe in divorce, as the Bible is. You don't just divorce willy-nilly. Christ essentially established that precedent for
that.
us. But because he wanted to have it his way, and he wanted to circumvent the Pope himself, that is the religious institution and its core faith and doctrines, he established his own church, which is the Church of England. Once again, he did this in 1534, established the Church of England so that he could marry. So here we have a very clear example of the king over the church. He has now started his own church, the Church of England, so that he could just marry another woman. The Church of England's still around today, but this is one in which the king was over the church. Now, Dave, as a Christian, if we were in that time period, you and I, we're both pastors. We're here faithfully preaching God's word in whatever, part of the country that we're in, because we're both kind of smaller church pastors. And you hear the king has started a new church so that he could divorce his wife. I mean, how are you going to feel about that, my guy?
Be like, gosh. I'm like, does he have to be our king? I'm like, he's so wrong. like an abuse of power. I mean, I would be outraged. You could say, like, I don't want that to be an understatement. Like, I'd be outraged. This is our leader abusing his power, and not even abusing his power. He is now asserting power over that which he does not have power over, and he is trying to insert himself over things that it's like, you're out of your jurisdiction. I know you're the king and all, but this is untouchable because it's like you're a lowercase king, and the church has the head of Christ as its head, and he's the capital K king. So I don't know, like, who made you God? Is like what you'd be saying. Like, who do you think you are? That we're like, you know what? I don't like that part of the Bible, and I'm the king, so I can kind of do what I want, and no repercussions because I'm the king over the church, and so I can say
Yeah.
what they can or can't do. Uh, I would not be
Yeah.
happy if I was average Joe,
Oh,
average Pastor Dave, in my little, parish, and I hear
oh,
that
yeah.
happened.
And
But then
it's
I,
and it's such a like textbook thing too,
yeah,
right? It's not like, this is a great theological concept we can debate. Textbook, layup,
yeah,
decision, and judgment. Wrong. I mean, it's the very same thing that the King Herod did, right? I
yeah,
mean, it's not
oh yeah,
exactly the same, right? Because he didn't marry his brother's wife. But it's the same thing of like having a divorce so he could get what he wants, except he's in power. And so like one king to another, it's such an easy decision to make here that it is absolutely wrong.
mhm,
Now, you and I both agree, textbook, easy thing to go against, but here we are, and this is kind of going to parallel a lot more when we get into modern day. But,
right,
as you said, way out of your league. You're not allowed to do that. We got to call that out. You have abused your power and authority, and we're going to call that out. So, we just came forward on this as ourselves, but who also took this stance is essentially, Protestantism.
yeah,
All Christendom
100%,
essentially took that stance. More
yeah,
particularly, a certain sect of Protestantism, or Christianity for those who don't know what I mean by Protestantism, because, October 31st, what do we call
yeah.
that other than, harvest or Halloween, but Reformation Day?
Reformation Day, the Reformed guy. I mean, like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, we all love the Reformation. Like, if you're a Protestant, you love the Reformation. But of course, the
hmm
Reformed guy loves the Reformation Day. You know, woohoo!
Oh yeah. And so Martin Luther, October 31st, nails the 95 Thesis to the church door and essentially causes what is the Reformation, or a schism if you want to call it that. But that would be the Reformation. That would be the birth of Protestantism, which is essentially what we call Christianity. The
Mm,
distinction between Christians or Protestants and Catholics, which is why, we have sort of that interesting but terrible thing of, Catholics are Christians too. It's like, yeah, I mean, there's what we mean, and then there's what we don't mean.
right.
They're under the
Oh
umbrella,
gosh.
but we're talking about the distinction here.
Well, because so are
Um,
Mormons and Seventh Day Adventists and Jehovah
yeah,
Witnesses. Like, they're all considered Christians because
yeah.
they claim to follow Christ, and we're like, we have some big
It's like, you know what
differences.
we
You
mean.
you know
You
what
know what
we
we mean.
mean? It's like, well, do I? Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
but before we get into that
Yeah. That could be
rabbit
its own
trail,
podcast
ooh,
too. But so we have a Christian sect that is the Puritans. Why were they called the
yeah,
Puritans? Other than they wanted a pure form of Christianity, taking it even further than what Martin Luther did, because they wanted that pure, good form of Christianity. Now, one of the um, preachers, the Puritan preachers of the day, is John Winthrop, and he would go
yes,
across on the boats to establish essentially the first little seedling. If I were to say colony, you would be thinking 1776, but the first little seedling, the first little town on
church
that
planting,
Plymouth Rock. Yes, he
the
he
first
came
church
across to the
planter.
Americas to establish this town and start afresh and anew in the new open world that is in
Mm,
North America. And he wrote this, which is very interesting, and we're actually going to start including primary resources and start quoting people just so you can hear it for yourselves. But there's going to be a phrase I want to emphasize here. So John Winthrop, 1630, writes this: "For we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God, in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. Now, that
Mm.
sounds like a man whose sole goal is God himself, right? That sounds like a man who's going out for the reason of religious grounds. Did
Yeah.
you want to say anything,
Um,
Dave?
well, he's a Puritan. I don't want to. He was probably a Presbyterian, and I think, well, he was a Presbyterian,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think his covenant theology was at play, where it's not like a one to one, like where he almost saw himself as Joshua going
Yeah.
into the promised land, but he understood. He's like, you know what? Let's not do what Israel did when going into a new land and becoming like the people where we're going, but like let's, if we're going to go to a new place where we have to establish some sense of morality, a code of conduct, if you will, because you don't want it to be a free for all. And if you're a person in general, you know that not everyone is a basically good person all the time. There are evil people that exist, and you can't control who's coming over on a boat with you. And honestly, we not to get into all the history, but there were certainly people fleeing arrests uh, in well, now it's the United Kingdom, but in England at the time that certainly were like, yeah, maybe if I get on the boat and I go over there, then I can run away from my problems. And so he knew that he wasn't, uh, not everyone was just going to go and have, come to this, new world for all the right reasons to do all the right things. But he at least knew for him and himself what he was going there to do, and that he wanted to have a place for other like-minded people to be. Specifically, the fact that when he says like with it, even that vernacular, we shall be as a city upon a hill. I mean, he is
Yeah.
thinking of the words of Christ about
Yeah.
who we are to be as Christians, where you're not like a candle and you place it under a bowl for no one to see. We are to be salt into the earth, light in darkness. We are to be a city on a hill, that people, a beacon of hope. And he actually, I mean, what great words. So
Oh
I could say
yeah.
a whole lot more. Just the I don't want to deal falsely. We don't want to be here for the wrong reasons. He's saying God in his language, like based off like I don't want to get ahead of myself. Like, but what separation of church and state has become? Like this guy is out of line because he said
Yeah.
God. Um,
And
and
absolutely, I'm glad you brought that up too, because that that phrase right there, a city upon a hill, is what I wanted to emphasize in my reading. And we cannot miss that. I mean, to miss that phrase is to miss all understanding of John
agreed.
Winthrop's theology and what he's trying to do there. I think you're
Mm,
absolutely right. His covenant theology is coming into play because John Winthrop does believe that he has this colony is certainly a special relationship with the Lord, and that just as Israel, the elect people of God, had a relationship with the Lord and they were a light to the world, so too would the colonies be a light to the world, essentially in their own sort of way, starting afresh and anew. Now, what is he deriving that from? Well, that's Matthew, I believe 6. No, Matthew 5. I have it up here right now.
yeah, it's
Matthew
definitely on the Sermon
5,
on the Mount.
14 and 15. I'll go ahead and read that. This is Jesus' words, you are a light of the world, a city set on a hill
Mm,
cannot be hidden. Nor do
wow.
the people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives it light to all the house. John Winthrop here is establishing a seedling of a colony in the new world, and is saying that we will essentially be the new Israel in a new land, properly living under God, and we will be a beacon to the world as an example of how a colony, how a people can rightly live under God in just relationship. And
Hmm.
so this could not be more theologically pregnant with meaning. This is This is absolutely deep. John Winthrop is doing a huge thing here, and it's an experiment that would later fail because they would all almost die in the first winter.
Yeah. Oh, poor
But
things.
these are essentially the people that would stay in the new Americas too. And from that would come the colonies some within 100 years, right? And so
Hmm.
this is the foundation, which is why I'm calling it a seed, because when we get to the tree, that's where it came from. And so we have the Puritans coming across to the Americas. John Winthrop, we're a city upon a hill, and that's and this is 1630. We have not yet gotten to the 1776, but you
Nope.
can see already how much that God is married to the government. God is absolutely the focus of the church and the state here, and we have not seen anything where we need to separate it. Now, Dave, I know what's coming up
Yes.
next. You get to the 1600s. There's a famous thing other than the King James version 1611. There's
True.
another date here, and that's 1646. I'm gonna go ahead and let you take this one because you're the specialist on this.
Oh gosh, let's. Well, yeah, and well, I don't know about special, but yeah, I love it. And well, because and it's a historical document, and so we're talking about history. Why not? It's a religious and a historical document. The Westminster Confession of Faith, 1646. Woohoo! I love it. So this is 16 years after George or John Winthrop. Gosh, there's a George coming up later too. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah, yep, yep.
We love. There's so many good men of God, thankfully, that the Lord has
Yeah.
used to be influenced. But with the Westminster Confession of Faith, I want to look specifically at the 20th chapter, which
Hmm.
talks about Christian liberty, Christian freedom, uh, and it's the fourth paragraph. There's four paragraphs in that chapter. The first three paragraphs kind of outline the freedoms that we have as Christians in the sense of like Christ has freed us from the power of sin and death. We're freed from guilt. We're free to, we're not under the curse of the law anymore. Those are freedoms, but I want to look at a specific freedom in the sense of uh, a very interesting chapter of how the Word of God is clear, how God doesn't want us to pervert that freedom into licentiousness and anarchy either. God didn't free us to now do whatever we want, whenever we want, however we want.
Hey, that sounds
He
familiar.
It does. He freed
That
us to do
sounds
certain
sounds like
things.
Paul.
It is Paul,
Yeah.
and so I want to look at this chapter about how it essentially addresses it's wrong if you reject lawful civil authority,
Hmm.
and I want to mention like it's the rejection of lawful civil authority. If you have civil authorities that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, abusing, then by all means, if they're keeping you from doing what the Lord calls you to do, then humbly rebel. Uh, but if they're doing their job, then submit, listen,
Yeah.
trust their judgment and their leadership. And I want to even get into that, but before I even do that, real quickly, the Westminster Confession of Faith itself is, and I even did this when we were kind of looking at our creeds a little bit when we looked at the Sparkle Creed, the first episode,
Hmm.
that this document is issued by the government. It's a religious document that the
Hmm.
government made them do and
I,
gather.
I didn't even know that about that. That's
Uh,
really interesting.
yeah, actually, it's in the preface um, of at the beginning
Oh,
of the
geez.
Westminster
You
Confession of
can
Faith. I don't
you
know if
can
you've
see
seen.
how much of the Westminster Confession of Faith I've read.
Yeah, no,
It's in the
it's
preface. You
fine.
didn't get through it. You didn't even
Yeah,
open the first
no,
page.
it's and it's very interesting that it's essentially saying that we have been set apart here, this group
Hmm.
of pastors, this group of theologians, to
Hmm.
gather by the order of Parliament to
Oh, okay.
reform the Church of England. So let's go way back to
Why would the
Henry.
Church of England need to be reformed? It was established on such great intentions.
I know, right? Wrong. Exactly. Uh, and it's a beautiful picture that here we have a group of pastors. They were essentially gathered together
Mhm.
to advise Parliament
Hmm.
on how they should, how to bring the Church of England into greater conformity with the Church of Scotland. That's what happened. I'm saying Church of
I
England,
feel like
Church of Scotland.
I feel like there needs to be an emphasis
Yeah,
here
these
in case
countries.
people missed
Yeah,
it. If I'm getting you right, the government asked these group of pastors to establish something, essentially what will be the Westminster Confession of Faith, to help them govern. This is
yes, like,
going back onto, hey, we need a religious
mhm.
confession of faith to help us govern better.
Yeah, imagine that
Okay,
happening
wow.
today. Because what ended up happening is you had like we're getting into the why is there a separation of church and state,
Right.
because our founding fathers were going to learn that they didn't want this is a church of the United States of America.
Right.
You had a Church of England. The people in Scotland didn't like the Church of England, so what did they do? Well, we're the Church of Scotland. And now you have essentially two churches.
Yeah.
And so what Parliament does is saying, hey, we need pastor theologians to come and advise us and help us to we don't want there to be a church. There shouldn't be a Church of England. There shouldn't
Hmm.
be a Church of Scotland. There should just be the church, right?
Yeah.
And that would be like the I'm trying to think of the equivalent of like Congress calling people like me, you, maybe greater pastors and thinkers that are more popular, and we're all coming together. We're going to DC, and they want to know, okay, how can we unite? Let's use our states. How do we unite the Church of California with the Church of Maryland? Like
Got it.
it's
Yeah.
like that idea. Um, and it's actually interesting. I don't want uh, you know, this isn't to be like a naysayer, but unfortunately, the Westminster Confession of Faith actually didn't accomplish its original goal.
What?
It didn't, unfortunately, yeah, mankind. It did not bring the Church of England and the Church of Scotland together.
That's a plot twist right there.
However, typical God using even the failures of man to accomplish his great good that I'm
Hmm.
now looking at this document with everyone. But this was I want to get into it, but it is something beautiful that here the reason why we even have a Westminster Confession of Faith, that it even exists,
Yeah.
is because a government said, "Hey, we need pastors to come together and help us in how we regulate and maintain
Yeah,
the church."
I'm really glad that you gave us that context, because I think that only undergirds exactly what we're talking about
Exactly.
even more.
Yeah. I'm like, I gotta say this before we even now. Let's actually what does it say?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so I said chapter 20. That's on Christian liberty and freedom. The fourth paragraph specifically wants to hit on the idea that the perversion of Christian freedom. Just because you're freed in Christ doesn't mean you're freed from all lawful civil authority
Mm,
now. And so, in short, if I could summarize it, gospel freedom does not mean absolute freedom from all human authority. Christ
right.
doesn't want to take us back to the period of judges, where now everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
that was anarchy. They didn't have a king, and so Christ is like, "You have a king now, so let's be
Yeah,
better."
I think that's really important too. Sorry to jump in there, but
You're
it
good.
just sort of sparked to mind. As you were saying, yes, God is king. As you go through the Psalms, and we know the kind of book format, but as Israel was in exile, they started to kind of rethink their life, right? Because they're in exile,
I mean,
and they
yeah, you do a lot
realized
of.
we don't have a king currently, but we just remembered God is our king. and it
Hmm.
and it brought back to focus, which they would, do when they went back into the land, that God is king, right?
Yeah.
sort of the same parallel thing of when we get towards Acts and stuff, is that Christ, what did he say to Pilate other than I am a king, but my kingdom is not of this earth,
There you
right? And
go.
so as we're under the rulers of, a Caesar and Constantine and all these other rulers, um, God is king first, right? And so what are we to do with that? If King Henry is king, but God is king first, well, then I'm not under the rules and regulations of King Henry, right? No.
Hmm.
We are to live peaceably in all understanding that God has set them in authority, as Romans 13 says. Um, but we are to kind of live peaceably and faithfully under them, knowing that God placed them over us. But yes, God is king, right? And so
Exactly.
if anything kind of clashes with that, then we're gonna have civil disobedience.
Right. And when what this paragraph and I encourage anyone, it's free online. You can buy a copy too, but it's free online, Westminster Confession of Faith, and just see all the scripture that they put with these statements because they really try
Hmm.
not to just like assert their opinions. Goodness, you read the Westminster Confession with the proof texts, and it's like you might not still agree on everything, but at least they're not just trying to give their opinion.
Yeah.
But what we get at is like, okay, Christ is king. And as our king, we submit to him first and foremost. But Christ being our king, he has instructed us that we are also supposed to obey the little kings if
Yeah.
they are doing their jobs right. And so to obey Christ is to obey little kings sometimes. And so the first paragraph is, or it's a whole paragraph, but the first statement is God intends that the authorities he has ordained on earth and the freedom Christ has purchased should not destroy
Hmm.
but mutually uphold and preserve each other. And I'm showing my hand here. We
Yeah.
care about church and state because they're both divine institutions.
Right.
God created both the church and the state. And what we're saying here is that the freedom that Christ purchased shouldn't destroy the church or the state, but that it actually should uphold them and preserve them both. In that way, therefore, those who oppose any lawful power or the lawful exercise of power, whether civil or ecclesiastical, meaning
That is yeah.
church, yeah,
Yeah,
like
the church.
I reject pastors, I reject my elders, I reject the leadership of the church, or maybe like if you're a part of a particular denomination, and like it's like then maybe you need to leave that denomination. uh, but like yeah, whether it's your House of Representatives or local or on the pretext of Christian freedom, meaning saying, I don't have to listen to you because I have
Yeah.
freedom in Christ. I'm not trying to do the snarky voice, but I mean,
But they are pretty
but they
snarky.
are
Yeah.
snarky. Um, so if you do that on the pretext of Christian freedom, it says this: you are actually resisting God.
Hmm.
The irony, just like you're saying, you were using your freedom in Christ to actually rebel against Him.
And I'm sorry,
Wow.
you guys can't see this, but I'm looking here at the Westminster Confession of Faith with him, and man, do they provide a lot of good text.
A ton.
Just for that statement alone, they got Matthew 12:25, 1 Peter 2:13, verse 14 as well, and 16, Romans 13:1 through 8, and Hebrews 13:7. It's like they are not talking out of their butt. All of this stuff is grounded.
Yeah. As best as they can. Well, and you have to remember, this is a document that they are trying. Like, remember, I said that context. They are trying to unite the Church of Scotland and the Church of England, and they've been issued to meet under the authority of Parliament. So, like, it's like
Yeah,
you don't take this lightly. This is no joke. You
yeah.
are going to cover all your bases because what's going to happen? You have to present this to Parliament, and if you don't do a good job, like, like,
I think
yeah,
I think what
uh,
makes this so awesome is like, after that statement, it ends with, that you are actually resisting God, and then a list of Bible verses that back up
yeah,
their
yeah,
statement. It's
yeah.
like you're
Mhm.
resisting God. Here is his word.
Yeah, like you are in rebel,
Yeah, like
and
direct
they call it
rebellion.
out. The
Yeah.
irony. The very thing that sets you free from sin, you're using to help you sin. Like,
Yeah.
how dare you? And then even like,
I
and
mean,
this is yeah.
This
It's
is sort of
wow,
off
right?
topic. It's just as like funny in irony when someone says, "Yes, I'm a Christian, but I read the Bible by myself and have a relationship by myself." It's like, really, have you read Hebrews yet, where it says, "Do not forsake the assembly of the body"?
Like
Because
I
it
haven't
doesn't
gotten to
look
that
like
part yet.
it doesn't sound like you're reading or having a relationship with God when he says you got to have a relationship with your local church body.
Okay, like, are you sure? Because I think if you were, you would blank. Oh gosh, because
Yeah,
and it's so true, and like, and they're recognizing that,
yeah,
and so I so love that. Like, hey, we're not just going to promise absolute, anarchy. And then they give the rationale. Why do I say all this? What is the purpose of all this? Well, it's to support, promote, or practice, or sorry, this, and it's kind of like, it kind of tells you what you should do, and this is what happens if you don't do it, what you shouldn't
hmm
do. Uh, the support, promotion, or practice of such opposition, which contradicts natural understanding or the known principles of Christianity, like meaning like you should know this by default. Like you live in a world where man must be governed, and so you should
yeah,
kind of know this. And then especially if you're Christians, when it comes to matters of faith, worship, and associations, which denies the power of godliness or which disrupts the peace and unity among believers, should lawfully be called to account and proceeded against by the church.
hmm.
And so that's one of those, and if there's a lot of proof texts for that as well. I think
Yeah,
a main one that I just want to illustrate because like it's a lot. I think it's 20 something at least. The main one I want to emphasize is almost like when Paul talks about, or sorry, not Paul, James, when he talks about when you're taking your fellow brothers to court sometimes, in the sense that there's certain matters that are to be dealt with and handled among Christians, that there are spiritual disputes and not like, you know what, this brother wronged me, he slandered me or something, and now I'm going to sue him
hmm.
in the secular court of law. When it's like, hey, how are you going to go to a secular institution to help you with a spiritual issue? It's like you need to keep that in the church, and so it's kind of calling out. Uh, we
Yeah,
say that we say if you don't submit to lawful authorities, you're being bad, and now it wants to address how you're also supposed to submit to lawful church authorities, and how it's bad if you don't. Obviously, don't submit to authorities that, like it says, if it denies the power of godliness,
yeah.
that's bad. If it's a church that, well, quote unquote church, that disrupts the peace and unity among believers, like, I mean, I think that literally sounds like Paul, like, why are you quarreling, James? Why do you quarrel with one another?
Yeah,
Division's bad. Uh,
and they have
so
32
32. Okay, I knew it was at least 20.
texts referenced
Yeah,
right after that. It's like a paragraph of text to
the
look
Bible.
to that support what
Yeah,
they just said.
and it's about like you're getting Bible, like they're like,
Yeah.
and like again, you might have some discrepancies on how they interpret the Bible,
Hmm.
but we're not arguing. Like that's interpretation though, not source. Like where are you getting this material? Uh, so I took a while with that. This because it was just so interesting because I've heard too many people that go, I'm free in Christ, and now it's just like a free for all,
Yeah.
which is also like the Bible does not say that. Government's good. It's just good government's good. And so that's why it's interesting that the Westminster Confession of Faith, they kind of took this opportunity to run with like, hey, Parliament asked us to advise them on what they should do. So let's
Yeah.
take advantage and tell them what they should do based off
And
what the Bible says.
and you can almost hear history in the
Yes.
background of it, with
Yeah.
like just the way that they're speaking about it. They're sort of navigating that tug of war to essentially say both and, that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
king and the pope, so to speak, because obviously as Christians we don't believe the pope, but historically popes existed. So it's sort of that tug of war of like, no, actually both are even here, so
Yeah.
long as they are abiding under Christ the King. right?
Yeah,
It's like,
it's like imagine two spheres, and they're both
yeah.
under the head of Christ. Or you can even say, the House of Representatives and the Senate are two
Hmm.
spheres that are both under the head of Congress, like the
Oh,
label
yep, yep.
Congress. And
Hmm.
there's also checks and balances where they're two parties, but they're both, that's the legislative branch. They're still under the judiciary branch and the executive branch. And
Did
so
we just
you
talk
want to,
about a trinity here?
oh snap! Like you can tell the United States government, like it was based off a Presbyterian government. Like they knew what they were
That's
doing.
funny. Yep.
Okay, okay. But this chapter 23, a couple chapters later, is on the civil magistrate. And magistrate's fancy word, but it really is just trying to address civil authority, civil
Hmm.
government, the powers that be. So it's like, okay, if there's a church and then there's the state, what does God say about each party?
Right.
And this is a whole chapter on what God says about those governing authorities the ones that we are to lawfully the lawful what does a lawful civil authority look like? And so it's the first part is the divine institution, purpose, and power of civil government. Like what a broad category. All right, Parliament, because they don't know about America yet. Like I mean they know about but they're not thinking globally. Like they're
Right.
thinking like the Parliament. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
Parliament, this is this is your divine institution. Like this is how came into existence. This is your purpose, and this is the power you have.
I mean, just the way that they verbalize that too.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, oh, your parliament, right? Well, this is your divine institution, not just
I
your
know.
institution.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
this is
Not
your
man-made.
godly given
Yeah.
power, purpose, and power in government. Like they
Right? Isn't that
even
awesome?
had to add that in there. So yeah,
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, no wonder. Like it came so, and I didn't talk on this. Like 1646 is when it was finally compiled and released. They
Hmm.
started meeting. It took 7 years. They started meeting
Oh
in
wow.
1659, or sorry, 1639,
Oh wow. Yeah.
or that's yeah 7. I mean, they met a while, and they like they were picking like every single word. Like I mean, they were being deliberate. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously they said divine institution because it's not just any old. It's like good observation. And so this is how we know. Very first uh very first sentence of the first paragraph. God. I love it. The first word. They talk about the divine institution. This is what you're supposed to do as a civil magistrate. You ready? God.
God.
like nailed it. God, the supreme Lord and King of the whole world. Oh, I just love. I
Wow.
mean, like
That's
I'm gonna keep reading, but it's just like, oh, they called them out.
yeah.
Uh, he has ordained civil authorities to be over people under him for his own glory and the public good. For this purpose, he has armed civil authorities, like that's why they have swords and weapons or whatever. He has armed civil authorities with the power of the sword to defend and encourage those who are good and to punish wrongdoers. It's great.
Wow.
Uh, and then they go. Uh, this is just an observation of that. Like it was an interesting commentary that I was kind of reading on the confession. It's one of
Hmm.
my books. I didn't bring it, but the commentary on confessing the faith says the Bible does not specify any particular form of civil government. We're going to kind of get into that, Mike. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
say monarchy. It doesn't say you have to have a republic. Thou shalt be a democracy.
Yeah.
But it affirms that the ultimate foundation of human government is in God's appointment. Calvin even talks about it where it's like, if you have like, it's better to have a godly monarch, or dare I say, like a godly dictator, than to have
Hmm.
an evil, corrupt democracy.
Yeah. I think it really speaks to their understanding that the transcendent God that has been throughout all time, certainly longer. than the time of humans and their creation,
Yeah, right.
this is
That
a
mandate.
really interesting concept too, because this is a random fun fact, but I thought it was quite profound. I forgot which professor said this, but it was like, did you know humans created something unique that God didn't? And I thought, what on earth could he be talking about?
We were
And he
like,
said,
whoa, like that's out of the, yeah,
government.
what?
like
Uh,
created government, which is
I was like,
not to
bull.
say that there isn't hierarchy or anything, but like the
No.
idea of this governmental system is something that humans created to help organize themselves. And
Uh,
so I was like, oh, that's pretty profound. And
until.
so in however, yeah, right, because once you develop a hierarchy, you've developed those below you in a system of
Right.
exploitation and manipulation. But how humans have chosen to govern themselves, the different types of governing, because you have dictators, you have theocracies, you have
Hmm.
monarchies, and then even as those in Egypt, you have something of a hybrid of a monarchy theocracy, because
Oh,
Pharaoh is
true.
God, the divine.
Oh, right.
um, so you have all these different types of governments, and God has been above and seen it all, right?
Yes.
And so you see that, like, this wording sort of pays attention to that, hey,
Correct.
whatever government is instituted, whatever person is reading this in their form of government in anywhere in the world, in time and space, God is the one over it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, and we're kind of again showing our hand to separation of church and state. What it has become, it's something that it never was meant. I'm saying it's a false reality. You can't separate God from something that He made.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah,
David. Spoilers.
profound. I
We were
know.
supposed to wait till the
Drop the
end.
bombs, but it's like it's
They
so
didn't see this
vicious.
one coming.
I know, and like, well, because we've had it happen.
Yeah.
You hear
Yeah.
someone say something religious, and they say separation of church and state.
Hmm.
And I even want to, like, just a very quick aside. Let's think about the Roman Empire real quick. It wasn't church, but there was but religion. Let's say religion and state. We say church and state, but like what we really mean is religion and state. And I mean, imagine the Roman Empire with their polytheism, or they believed the
Hmm.
emperor was God. Uh, you would have gone like Christians got persecuted because they denied their gods. And so like you have no one complaining going, "Hey, the Roman Empire was really out of line because they didn't separate religion from state."
Right.
All of their republic, all their senators were polytheists. They believed in Greek mythology. So
Oh
how dare
yeah.
they?
And then they were overtaxing their people, with the fish taxes and all that other stuff. They were massacring the Jews, right, because of their public protests and all that other stuff. So
Right.
it's like, what time period did Jesus come into that he could have, with his legion of angels that he can
Wow.
call down in a moment? How did he act? He acted in submission
Yeah.
because God put him in there,
Yeah. Oh
you
gosh,
know?
I know. What a great example. And I want
And
to,
just real
yeah,
quickly before we move
sure,
on
because
to
we're gonna want to
the
finish this.
next section, right? Because we're moving here, we're going to start moving into the legitimacy and conduct of Christians in public office. But I think we're going to do that in the next part, because we're coming up to the end here. And so we covered a lot of ground. I mean, we started off essentially in the Bible, but we started off more specifically in Acts, and we've gone all the way up to about 1600 years of history we just
Oh
covered
gosh.
in such a brief amount of time. But this
Gosh.
document, once again, it's 1646, I believe. Let me
Yep.
look it up. Yeah, 1646. Very important, guys. Very important document, as it's a document that they are asked to make for the sake of the government. Now, you might be thinking, why are we making such a big deal out of this? That's England. Well, this is 1646, right? John Winthrop just left. He's over there in the colonies. He had a very harsh winter, but there's still going to be a lot more boats. They're going to be leaving to the Americas over the next 100 years that will be the establishment of our nation. So that is not to understate how important this document is to our nation. So I just wanted to say that we are going to cut off here in a sec and continue on. But go ahead, Dave. I just wanted to stress the importance of this document and why we're bringing this up.
Oh no, 100%. And we only have we have a few points left in this paragraph, but they did a very good job of kind of like what we try to do here on Ground Level Theology, where they wanted to give Parliament like the best fighting chance that they had in being able to unite these two churches, and so they're going line by line, looking through the whole Bible about on this topic. It's systematic theology as well. It's a biblical theology and a systematic theology, even before we had like some of those formal terms. Where's the Bible? What we're doing on Ground Level theology. What does the Bible say about the civil magistrate? That's what they're trying to figure out on this chapter. And so they talk about, okay, it's a divine institution. This is your purpose. This is the power you have. And then it's a very interesting category here about the legitimacy and the conduct of Christians in public office.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so here, this is the second paragraph of chapter 23, where it says the first line, it is lawful for Christians to accept and execute offices of civil authority when that is their calling. You don't have to feel like you were rebelling against your king if you run for senator or president of the United States. Now, I don't know how far you'll get, if you're keeping with your Christian values, but you are allowed to run as long as you maintain your Christian integrity. It is not forbidden.
In some sense, you are allowed to be a tax collector as long as what you're doing
good taxes
isn't going to be immoral, right? And so we might be thinking of Jesus's day with the tax collectors.
I'm collecting taxes so we can have a school for blind kids. I'll give you my money. That's nice. So that's one example. Then the second line, it says, in the administration of such offices. So when you're doing your job, you should take care to support true religion. That means like Christianity. True religion, justice, and peace, according to the beneficial laws of each government.
Before you unpack that real quick, I just have to say a note for our viewers. An old way to talk about Christianity, an old way to refer to Christianity in particular, that is not to say Christianity as an example, but an old phrase that was used back in the day to refer to Christianity in particular is religion and true religion. So when you think about the 1950s, you got that old time religion. He's not talking about Catholicism, not talking about Buddhism or any of that. It's actually an old phrase to refer specifically to the Christian faith and our Bible. And so when you hear that, or if you're reading through it with us, to take care to support true religion, it's not a philosophical statement to say, well, which one is the true religion? Let's look through that. It's actually a statement to say that should take care to support the true exercise and belief of Christianity. So I don't want our viewers to kind of get lost in that idea. It's referring to Christianity, not a philosophical statement outside of it.
Well said. It's not just a clothing brand. It's something much more than that. And I kind of already prefaced before I read it. Hey, Christians, you're lawfully allowed to enter into public office, but this is like another thing with separation of church and state. You do not stop being a Christian
Hmm.
when you enter into that office. That means when you vote according to the law of God and your Christian principles. When
Yeah.
you vote for what is just. And when you're representing people in your community, or, you're thinking about like if you're like a representative of the House, you represent them the way Christ represents you before the Father. Like you
Yeah.
have their back. You sacrifice for them. This isn't a power trip to see what you can get out of it, but you give yourself. You serve the public, which is like I wish we had more like public officials, and that I wish there were more Christians in office, if I could say that. Uh, if it's a beautiful thing. Oh, then the third sentence. This is it's also one of the bases for me for why a Christian could also serve in law enforcement or military,
Hmm.
armed forces. This is found in a whole host of scripture as well, but they said in doing so, and so in the process of being a public official, you may lawfully, under the New Testament, wage war on just and necessary occasions.
Hmm.
And we kind of did this like with murder and killing,
Yeah.
and so
So
you
we
don't
did.
have
Yeah,
to,
we did cover that
yeah,
essentially.
and you might still have like and even our Halloween episode, conscience idea. That's on the individual level, what you may be willing or not willing to handle. But the Christian that becomes a Marine does not have to be petrified, going, oh gosh, like I'm about to go overseas to try to defend my country, and now
Yeah.
I just completely violated my faith. So there's encouragement there,
Which is
and then
why it says that they may do it. You know, maybe your
yeah.
conviction means that you don't sign up in the military.
Yeah, exactly. Well, 100%. And again, we talk about just necessary occasions. There might be a
Hmm.
time where like this is injustice. If there was a Christian, this sounds like an oxymoron, a Christian Nazi. Amber, actually, my wife listened to a wonderful documentary of a lot of guys that were Christians, didn't really understand the full understanding of what was happening until they saw what was happening, and they were treated, just like
Yeah.
the other Jewish victims, and they were, same punishment. But you know what? Like that was integrity. That was how,
Yeah.
like, maybe they joined because they're thinking, yeah, Hitler's, he's the leader. I'm submitting to my authority, until they
I mean,
realize like the fruition, like the fullness of
yeah.
what he was really after, and it's like, okay, and now I'm not listening to you anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the last line of that part of just, if I'm in public office as a Christian, uh, it gives you all these things. What's okay? What's okay? What's okay? And then this last line, it says, and then don't do this though. It is, or something that might be misunderstood as unlawful,
Hmm.
and it's not. Sorry, I should have said it that way. It's a misunderstanding. Some people might think it's unlawful, and it's actually not. It is not unlawful for Christians to be involved in political and civil affairs. It is improper for Christians to make their religion so private that the interests of piety, justice, and peace are not furthered.
Oh my goodness.
Like, what a
I could
line.
literally make an episode just on that statement
Like,
alone
right?
as, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like,
That's,
like, right?
I need
Like,
to put that on a bumper sticker. That's what I feel like.
I just
Uh,
got Mike to want to put it on a bumper sticker, everybody. It's
it's okay. It's not unlawful to participate in political and civil affairs. Okay, it's
nope.
not. It's
Cool.
not unlawful, folks, to get involved in politics and in culture and to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unlawful to do that. It's okay to do that. But guys, it is
Mm-hmm.
improper to make your religion, to make Christianity so private that the interests of piety, justice, and peace are not furthered. You can be a Christian. You don't have to get involved in politics. But if your Christianity is so private that Planned
Ooh.
Parenthood is
Yes.
promoting itself and you are in your house staying silent, Westminster Confession of Faith has something to
Calls
say
you
to
out.
you about that.
Yeah. And well, like, and I even think of like, I forget I wish I knew the individual because I would call them out. Maybe it's a
I
blessing I
I
don't.
can I
But
can think of someone as well
okay,
that
well,
we
maybe
would
we're talking
know.
the same person. But when it's like they had the essentially they had a statement like, as a Christian, I'm pro-life. But when
Yeah.
I enter into, as a representative or whatever, as I enter into this office, it's
Mm.
like I have to check my faith at the door because
Yeah,
it's separation of church and state.
I have something I
Uh,
want to say about that when we get
and it's
to
like
that
bull.
specific time era.
Like the Westminster Confession of Faith is like wrong. Like
Yeah.
that's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to use your office for.
Oh
Oh,
my
they
goodness.
call them
I
out. Oh,
mean,
it's
it,
great.
it it even it even boldly says it. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
separation of church and state. This one line
Oh
says,
yeah.
if I stay quiet, then I'm not doing it right.
Yeah. And I could even argue, let's say that I'm the Christian that's not in public office. It's like, man, at least on this issue, I ain't listening to that guy
Yeah.
because that is no longer a lawful civil authority. Uh,
Wow.
and they're going to get into right here the third paragraph, the limits of civil authority in relation to the church.
And
The tip of the
I
iceberg, right?
I think
Of
I
what
think
does
we
it
should
mean?
I think we should actually cut it here because
Okay,
I know we have a
cool.
little bit. I think this would be an actual good segment off. I was in the wrong page when I told our listeners that we were going to cut it off
I know.
further
I'm
down.
like, are you sure? I'm like, we got a little bit more to
No,
go, but
no,
okay,
no.
buddy, I got
I
you.
thought yeah, I was at the wrong part.
I'm like, you're
So
really hopeful.
we're but yeah, I think that's actually a really good place to stop just on that sentence alone. And guys, like I said, we are segmenting this. We're gonna put both, maybe even three parts out. Um, in these bite-sized 1 hour bite-sized. Can you call 1 hour bite-sized?
It's more palatable.
Yeah.
You're
Um,
doing an all-you-can-eat buffet, but it's 3 days in a row, so it's all good.
yeah. Unfortunately, we cut this document in half. I did want this document itself to be its own, but we did kind of run through the first 1500 years of history pretty quickly enough that I
Yes, we
thought we
did.
could.
An hour for 1,500 years, it's like 10 minutes for a century.
Yeah.
It's like that's fast. I thought CWC was fast with 2 semesters looking at however many thousand years. And
Yeah.
apparently this is
But
expedient.
but yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and end it here. We're gonna start again next part right where we're leaving off. But if you don't get to the next part until maybe a day or so, just meditate on this, and I'm just gonna go ahead and repeat it. It is not unlawful for Christians to be involved in political and civil affairs. It is improper for Christians to make their religion so private that interests of piety, justice, and peace are not furthered. We'll catch you in the next part.